When it has come to trade deals, we've had a pretty good year so far. We had Mercosur in January, we had the trade deal with India at the end of January, and now we've just had Australia, so things are going in the right direction. But there's definitely one trade deal that I absolutely despise, and that's the one with the USA.
I'm going to let you say it, but I think it's the biggest deal ever made. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
You probably remember in October, I think it was last year, where Ursula von der Leyen went to Scotland to meet with Trump. And we've got these super embarrassing pictures with both of them with the thumbs up, signing a deal that is basically so unfavorable for Europe that I was, pretty upset. And I'm even more upset today because the Parliament actually passed this EU-US trade deal. And I think this is the wrong decision. Now, let me quickly remind you what this trade agreement is all about. And as you can see, it's pretty one-sided. Let's first look at goods coming from the US going to the European Union. So firstly, the framework says 0% on most US industrial goods. So no tariffs for goods coming from the US to the EU. And more market access when it comes to some US fishery goods, and also more market access when it comes to US agricultural goods. And for this massive favor that we're pretty much doing for Trump and the US, you know what we're getting in return? Pretty much nothing. Things are getting worse. So before Trump, most of the exports from the EU to the US were sitting at around 4% tariff. Now, however, most of these tariffs will increase to 15%. So that includes German cars that now have a tariff of 15%. And aluminium and steel, 50%. And there's only some strategic sectors like, I think, spare parts for airplanes and chips, if I remember correctly, that have a 0% tariff. So, not good news for our exports. And what makes all of this even worse is that we've kind of promised the US, or at least von der Leyen has promised the US, that we would make some massive investments. $750 billion worth of US energy, and another $600 billion worth of just general investment into the USA. These figures are so unrealistic, and they probably will never happen. But just the audacity of this being part of the framework and us agreeing to it is, very disappointing. So, coming back to the European Parliament and what they actually agreed upon today. Now, thankfully, they didn't agree upon these massive investments going to the US. But they did agree of lowering tariffs or temporarily suspending tariffs on a whole range of US goods. And it passed by quite strong numbers. And to be fair, it didn't completely pass. We're not implementing it straight away. It was a pass or a acceptance, or what's the better wording for this? A confirmation of the Parliament's position on this matter. And now something called a trilogue will start, where the European Commission, the Council of the European Union, which are the 27 member states, and the European Parliament will discuss their positions, and then we will have one more round of voting for the final thing. Nonetheless, I would like to look at some of the pros and some of the cons of the agreement again today, and really show you why this agreement really just doesn't work for Europe. But, to be fair, let's have a look at all the benefits that this trade agreement with Trump will bring to Europe, or could bring to Europe. And the big one that's always being talked about, especially by people like Merz from Germany, is stability for our European businesses. Because if we know there's a 15% tariff in the US, a tariff that, hopefully won't change because there's an agreement, businesses can plan with it and can therefore hopefully export more to the US in the future. That's at least how the logic goes, and I do have my issues with this argument, which we'll get to later. The second reason why many people argue this trade deal is a must-have for Europe is that it might avoid escalation into a broader conflict between Europe and the United States. And this is because they are worried that if we go against the US on trade, that this might then spill over into other conflicts around the world. What do I mean by that? If we now say to Trump, we don't agree with the trade agreement that we agreed upon last year, we're not going to sign it, he might stop supporting Ukraine, for example. Or he might do some bad stuff to NATO, or, I don't know, remove the troops, the US troops he has here in Europe. And that brings us to the third reason why so many MEPs voted in favor of this trade deal this morning in the European Parliament. And that is that they believe there are safeguards in place now that will limit any long-term damage that this could cause. I mean, one of the points I mentioned that there's only temporary application, so this is only relevant or valid until March 2028, thank God. And there's also something called the suspension mechanism. And this means that if the European Parliament or the EU feels that the US is not holding their side of the bargain, then this can be suspended and the tariffs can come back, right? But of course, knowing the EU, that will probably be a whole process in itself before we will do something like that. So those are basically the three big reasons of why so many voted in favor of this trade deal. But now I would really like to have a look at the reasons against this deal, because I believe they are so much stronger. And the real big problem for me is that this really sets a precedent. It sets a precedent that economic coercion is okay. We used to have a trade relationship with the US that was somewhat fair, somewhat balanced. Then Trump came along, started raising these massive tariffs on the European Union, to which we responded super slowly. And out of all of it, what did he get? More access to our market, and we basically got a lot less access to the US market with higher tariffs in place. We are basically saying to Trump, well done with your tactics, you won, we give up. And that is a wrong thing to do, because there's plenty of other countries around the world, like China, who could do something similar to us. So, I think it sets a very bad precedent. And this brings me to my second point, the second reason why this deal does not work. And that is that it's just not reliable. Have we not learned by this point in time that we simply cannot trust Trump? In the last couple of months alone, he threatened tariffs on Denmark because of Greenland, a whole situation he himself started. And lately, he's also been threatening tariffs on Spain because of their NATO spending. I mean, it's quite honestly ridiculous. And thinking that he will not do that again just because we have now agreed upon this trade agreement, I think is pretty naive. So the whole argument that this will stable relations, I do not think so. And that brings me to the third point, which is strategic autonomy. We have pretty much promised a big investment into the US when it comes to energy and other general investments. And I know that a lot of this might not happen, but it still is a very wrong precedent to set. And opening our market for US goods is also a bad precedent to set, because it slows us down on our mission to create strategic autonomy here in Europe, especially when it comes to energy. All of these fossil fuels that we want to buy from the US, or we've committed to buy from the US, is slowing our journey down. We need to be focusing on renewable energies here in Europe, and we also have to be focusing on nuclear energy here in Europe, so we don't have this dependency on the US, Russia, or whatever. So, those are the big problems. And yeah, I just cannot believe that so many politicians are still going ahead with this. Especially now that the Supreme Court in the US has made a ruling that the US president, Donald Trump, is not even allowed to set all of these tariffs. And I have reached this moment in time where I'm just like, let's rip off the Band-Aid. Yes, we have to go through some short-term pain of a potential trade war with the US, but we will survive it. Because we have so many cards in our hands, to use Trump's language. And the biggest one is the service industry. Just look at this chart. Look at the surplus of services that the US sends us or gives us here in Europe. And we're not even taxing it properly. We're not even talking about it. Like Facebook, like Apple, like Google, and all of these tech companies from the US, we should be targeting them. And I bet you, if we do that, and we show a strong hand, a strong unified voice in here in Europe, then Trump really will not start a trade war, right? What does Trump care most about, among a couple of other things, is the stock market. And if we start being very, very aggressive towards big tech from the US, I bet you that the taco metaphor will apply. Trump will back down. And that is how us Europeans have to start behaving. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And please let me know if you agree with me in the comments below. And if you don't, please also let me know, because I would love to hear your arguments of why this trade deal is beneficial for us. Thank you so much to all of the people that support the channel, especially, of course, our presidents. Your contribution is incredible. It really, really is. I just want to emphasize that. And for people that don't support us yet, do consider signing up as a member or a Patreon member, because your donations are really the backbone of this channel and make us all do this every day. Thank you so much, and see you all in the next video.